All right, so get ready because today we're diving into a story that's, well, it's really creepy, to be
Oh,
honest.
yeah.
We're talking about the Vampire of Nuremberg, based on the podcast episode Case 181. It takes place in Germany in the early 70s.
Okay.
It starts with some strange things happening at the Westfriedhof mortuary.
So what kind of strange happenings are we talking about here?
Well, at first it seems like simple thefts, you know?
Yeah.
Families are reporting jewelry missing from their deceased loved ones.
Yeah, that's awful. Such a violation on top of everything else they're going through.
Exactly. I mean, you expect a mortuary to be a place of respect, not a place where you have to worry about things being stolen. It's a total breach of trust. So, how did the authorities react to these initial thefts?
Well, actually, before the police really got involved, the night watchman at the mortuary, Georg Vomit, kind of took things into his own hands.
Oh.
Vomit was an ex-soldier, so he was used to taking charge. He was convinced that the thefts were an inside job, so instead of going to the police, he decided to stake out the mortuary himself, hoping to catch the thief in action.
Wow, that's pretty bold. I mean, he was basically acting as a vigilante.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. But, before we even get to Vamit's stakeout, the podcast does something really interesting. It kind of zooms out and talks about all these other bizarre incidents that were happening in cemeteries and mortuaries across Germany in the year leading up to the events at Westfriedhof.
Oh, that's right. They mentioned that, didn't they? Okay, so what kind of incidents are we talking about?
Okay, we're talking about bodies being posed in strange positions, bite marks found on corpses, a man found with a hunting knife plunged into his chest, and even in one case, a decapitation.
That's horrible. So the police were dealing with all these unexplained macabre events in addition to the thefts at Westfriedhof.
Right. And it was all just so strange and unsettling. Nobody had any answers, and it really started to create this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty.
I can imagine. I mean, if I lived in Nuremberg at that time, I'd be freaking out. You'd have to wonder if you were safe anywhere.
hmm
So, okay, let's go back to Vemmet and his self-appointed investigation. What happened when he decided to confront this supposed thief?
Well, picture this. Vamut is hiding in the crematorium during this huge thunderstorm.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah, the wind is howling, rain is coming down hard, and suddenly this figure appears. It's a man, and he's heading straight for a coffin containing the body of a young girl.
Okay, now that would be terrifying. What did he do?
He leaned over the coffin and kissed the deceased girl on the lips.
Oh my God. That's just wrong. I mean, beyond wrong.
Yeah, it's a truly disturbing image. And it was this act, more than anything else, that convinced Falmouth that this wasn't just some ordinary thief. He was dealing with something much darker.
Yeah, I can see why he'd think that. So what did he do? Did he try to stop him?
He did. He jumped out and chased the guy through the mortuary. They ended up fighting in an elevator. And that's when things got really intense.
What happened in the elevator?
Well, in the middle of the struggle, the intruder pulled out a 7.65 millimeter pistol and shot Vemmet in the abdomen.
Oh my God, so did Vammet.
He survived, luckily, but the gunman got away.
Of course he did. So the police are now dealing with a wounded night watchman, a string of unexplained incidents at mortuaries, and a potentially armed and dangerous guy on the loose.
Right. And nobody had any idea who this guy was.
What a mess. The city must have been on edge. So what happened next? Did they ever catch a break in the case?
Well, as if things weren't bad enough already, a few months later, there was a horrifying discovery in a forest outside of Nuremberg.
Oh no, what happened?
The bodies of a young couple, Marcus Adler and Ruth Lissy, were found in their car.
Oh, that's terrible. What happened to them?
Well, the killer had shot them both execution style, but then he did something truly horrific. He drank their blood.
Oh my God. I see why they call him the Vampire of Nuremberg. But was there any evidence connecting this double homicide to the incidents at the mortuary? I mean, besides the whole blood drinking thing.
Yeah, there was. Ballistics tests confirmed that the bullets used to kill the couple matched the one that had wounded Vammet at the mortuary.
Oh, wow. So now the police knew they were dealing with a serial offender, someone who had escalated from petty theft and, well, messing with corpses to cold-blooded murder. Did they finally get a lead on who this guy was?
They did, actually.
Yeah.
And it came from a pretty unexpected source, a coworker.
Really? How did that happen?
Well, after the double homicide, the police released a description of the suspect to the media. And a man named Helm Kosten, who worked at the Nuremberg Transit Company, saw it and thought, hey, that sounds a lot like my colleague Kuno Hoffman.
Okay, but what made him think it was Hoffman specifically? I mean, was there something about Hoffman that made him suspicious?
Well, yeah, Hoffman fit the physical description. Short stature, black hair, spectacles. He even had a red moped, which witnesses had seen at the crime scenes.
Hmm.
But what really made Costin suspicious was that Hoffman had just up and quit his job without any explanation.
I see. That would definitely raise some red flags. So what did the police do with this information? Did they go after Hoffman?
They did. They tracked him down and apprehended him pretty quickly, but there was one major complication. Kuno Hoffman was deaf and nonverbal.
Wow. That definitely complicates things. So how do you even question someone who can't hear or speak?
They had to bring in a special interpreter, and that's when they started to uncover just how troubled this guy really was.
So they learned more about his past.
Right. And it turned out that Hoffman had a really rough life, starting from his childhood.
Interesting. What can you tell us about his childhood?
Well, he was born in 1931, and his childhood was pretty horrific, honestly.
Oh.
Yeah, he was severely abused by his father.
Oh, that's awful. What kind of abuse?
It was mostly physical abuse, and it was brutal. I mean, his mother said that he was beaten, shoved into a sack, even hung from a window.
Oh my God, that's terrible. Poor guy. So, did Hoffman ever talk about his childhood?
Well, I mean, he couldn't really talk, but his mom always believed that the abuse was what caused his deafness and inability to speak.
It's certainly possible. I can't even imagine what that kind of abuse would do to a person.
It's really sad. You know, a doctor who examined him said that his deafness could have been from an untreated ear infection.
Really?
Yeah, but it was never treated, so.
That's just heartbreaking. It seems like his life was full of missed opportunities. So what happened after his childhood? Did the abuse and isolation continue?
Yeah, it pretty much did. He spent a lot of his life in and out of institutions, struggling to hold down jobs. He also had a history of criminal activity.
Like what?
Theft, arson, even multiple escapes from institutions.
It sounds like he was just constantly in trouble. But how does this troubled past connect to, the horrific acts he's accused of? Was there a specific event that kind of pushed him over the edge?
Well, this is where his fascination with the occult comes in. In 1966, he bought a book on black magic, and it seems like that was kind of a turning point for him.
So you're saying that's when things started to get really dark?
Yeah. He became obsessed with vampirism and necrophilia. He started to believe that by consuming blood and performing certain rituals, he could gain power, become more attractive, and even regain his hearing and speech.
Oh, wow. So he really believed that this stuff was real?
He did. It all stemmed from his deep loneliness and inability to connect with people.
So it was like he was trying to find a way to overcome all the challenges he'd faced in his life. But instead of seeking help or finding healthy ways to cope, he turned to the occult, and that ultimately led him down this incredibly dark path.
Exactly. So at this point, the police have Hoffman in custody, but did they have any actual proof that he was the vampire of Nuremberg?
Good question. What did they find when they searched his place?
Oh, they found a lot of incriminating stuff. I mean, we're talking Ruth Lissie's engagement ring, a human skull.
Wait, a skull?
A human skull that they later identified as belonging to one of the bodies from the Mullen Cemetery. They even found duplicate keys to the Westfriedhof mortuary.
Okay, that's pretty damning evidence. What about the gun? Did they find the 7.65 millimeter pistol he used to shoot Vomit?
They did. And it was found in a really unexpected place.
Where?
In his washing machine.
The washing machine?
Yeah, one of the officers decided to take it apart piece by piece, and that's where they found the gun.
Wow. Talk about attention to detail. So they had him. He confessed, right?
He did. They showed him the gun, and he just broke down. Over the next 20 minutes, he confessed to everything.
So he admitted to the mortuary thefts, the attack on Vomit, and the murders of Marcus and Ruth. What did he say about it all? Did he have any reason for why he did it?
He did. He said that he'd been desecrating bodies for 2 years. And get this. He was choosing his victims based on obituaries he read in the newspaper.
Oh my God, he was basically stalking the dead.
He was. He stabbed them, drank their blood, mutilated them. It was all part of his rituals, he said. He still believed that it would make him stronger and even restore his hearing.
It's incredible how he could be so delusional after everything he'd been through.
It really is. So here they had this guy, this truly monstrous individual who had committed these horrific acts. You'd think that would be in the city, but it's not. Once Hoffman was in custody, things took a really strange turn.
What do you mean?
Well, he started acting really erratically, like he was smashing furniture in his cell, writing these weird letters.
Like what kind of letters?
Oh, just strange stuff. He even tried to downplay the number of his victims by comparing himself to like a 16th century serial killer.
Wow, what was he trying to do?
It seemed like he was trying to manipulate people, to control how they saw him, even from behind bars.
So did it work? Did people believe him?
Well, that's a good question. And it's one that sparked a lot of debate. You see, two psychiatrists who examined Hoffman had very different opinions about his mental state.
Oh, what did they say?
One psychiatrist said that Hoffman was insane and shouldn't stand trial. But the other psychiatrist argued that he was fully aware of his actions and should be held responsible.
So they were basically at odds with each other. That's a tough situation. What happened next?
Well, because of this disagreement, the trial was suspended for 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, while the experts argued about whether or not Hoffman was truly insane.
Wow, that's a long time to wait for justice. So after that 2-year delay, what happened? Was he declared insane or did he end up standing trial?
Well, that's where things get a little fuzzy. We actually have conflicting information about what happened next. Some sources say that he actually never tried, that he was declared criminally insane and just, confined to a mental institution.
Well, yeah, I mean, considering everything, it makes sense that they declare him insane. But you said there's conflicting information, so what do the other sources say happened?
Well, there are other sources, some that seem to be more reliable, that actually say that he was found sane and did stand trial.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And these sources say that he was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life sentences for the murders of, what were their names? Marcus and Ruth.
Marcus and Ruth, yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, he got another 10 years for the attempted murder of Georg Vamet.
Wow. So basically, depending on what you read, he either spent the rest of his life in a mental institution or in prison.
Yeah, and it's strange because usually with cases like this, even if there's some debate at the time, eventually things get cleared up and we know what really happened.
Right. But with this case, the ending is just kind of unclear.
It is. And it gets even weirder because there are rumors that he was actually released from prison in 2004.
Wait a minute, released after all that? That doesn't seem possible. Do they say why he was released?
Unfortunately, the details are super sketchy. Nobody seems to know for sure. But some people say that he went back to Nuremberg. And get this. There was a rumor going around in 2008 that he was working on a memoir.
A memoir. Can you imagine? What would he even say? I mean, it'd be fascinating to read, but also disturbing. Do we know if the memoir was ever actually published?
That's the thing. Nobody knows. It's just like with the ending of the trial, the truth is out there, but it's hidden. We don't know if he was really released, if he wrote a book. We don't even know if he's still alive.
So it's a mystery. The vampire of Nuremberg just kind of vanishes.
Pretty much. I mean, officially, nobody knows where he is or what happened to him. It's like he just disappeared into thin air.
Well, this whole story is pretty unbelievable. It makes you wonder what would drive a person to commit such horrific acts, I mean, obviously he had a terrible childhood and he was really into the occult, but what else could have contributed to him becoming a monster, basically?
It's a good question, and it's something that a lot of people have thought about. I mean, if you look at the broader context, this was Germany in the early 70s.
Oh.
Still dealing with the aftermath of World War II, the Nazi regime. I mean, there was a lot of trauma, a lot of unspoken pain in that society.
Yeah, that's true. So you're saying that the overall atmosphere in Germany at that time could have played a role in Hoffman's, psychological state? Maybe it contributed to his feelings of isolation and alienation, which maybe pushed him toward those dark beliefs?
It's definitely possible. I mean, he didn't exist in a vacuum. He was a product of his time and his environment, just like we all are.
That's a good point. But let's go back to the occult for a second. I mean, how much of what he did can we really blame on his beliefs in black magic and vampirism? Was that stuff a genuine driving force behind his actions? Or was it just a way for him to justify what he was already doing? It's tough to say, really. On the one hand, he was clearly obsessed with those beliefs. I mean, he truly believed that drinking blood and doing those rituals would give him power and even cure his deafness. But on the other hand, maybe he was just using the occult as a way to make sense of his darker impulses, Like maybe those urges were already there, and the occult just gave him a framework, a way to channel them.
Yeah, I could see that. It's like he was searching for something to make him feel whole, to give him power and control. And for whatever reason, he found that in these really twisted and disturbing beliefs.
Right. And the really sad thing is that he probably would have done anything to achieve those goals, no matter how horrible. He was so desperate, so caught up in his own delusions, that he completely lost sight of, basic human decency.
It's a pretty extreme example of how powerful beliefs can be, even if those beliefs are based on something totally false or even dangerous. It is, and I think it's a reminder that we should always be questioning our beliefs, making sure that they're not leading us down a path that could hurt ourselves or others. We have to be careful about what we choose to believe and how we let those beliefs guide our actions.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I wanted to go back to something we talked about earlier. The fact that there are these conflicting reports about what happened to Hoffman. I mean, some sources say he was declared insane, others say he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, and then there are the rumors about his release and the memoir. What do you make of all that?
I think it shows just how complex this case is.
Hmm.
Maybe the different accounts reflect the different ways people saw him. Like maybe some people truly believed he was insane and deserved compassion, while others just saw him as a monster who should be locked up forever.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the whole story of Kuno Hoffman is just shrouded in mystery. Even his ending is unclear.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what really happened to him? Did he get the justice he deserved? Or is he out there somewhere living a normal life after doing all those terrible things?
And if he was released, why? Did he somehow convince the authorities that he was no longer a threat? It's unsettling to think about.
Definitely. And it really adds to the creepiness of the whole story, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
even though we know all these awful details about what he did, there's still this big question mark hanging over everything. We may never know the full truth about Kuno Hoffman.
That's a chilling thought. But it also makes you realize that even with all the information we have, there's still so much that we don't know about, the human mind and what can drive a person to do such terrible things. This case raises a lot of really important questions about human nature and about how we deal with people like Kuno Hoffman.
It does, and I think it's something that we need to keep thinking about, keep discussing, even if it makes us uncomfortable. Because the more we understand about the darkness that exists in the world, the better equipped we'll be to, you know, confront it and hopefully prevent something like this from happening again.
I agree. Well, this deep dive has been both fascinating and disturbing. I mean, it's a story that's hard to forget, that's for sure. And it definitely leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does. But even though it's a dark and unsettling story, I think there's some valuable lessons we can learn from it.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, thanks for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for having me.
As we've been talking about this case, it's just the horror of it all. The desecration of the bodies and the blood drinking and the murders. It's like something out of a nightmare.
It is a horrific case. There's no getting around that. And I think what makes it even more disturbing is how it plays on our deepest fears. The thought of somebody violating the sanctity of death and preying on the most vulnerable. I mean, it's something that just really gets to us on a very fundamental level.
It does, and it's like he crossed a line that, most of us couldn't even imagine crossing. And the fact that he did it repeatedly for years, it's almost incomprehensible.
It is. And I think it
Yeah.
speaks to a level of detachment, a lack of empathy that's really hard to grasp.
Mm.
But at the same time, there's this element of desperation, almost a longing, that makes him seem almost pitiable in a way.
It's an interesting point. I mean, you're saying that even though his actions were monstrous, there was still some part of him that was human, some part of him that was still, searching for connection, even if it was in this really twisted and, disturbing way.
Yeah, and that's what makes this case so challenging.
Mhm.
I think it forces us to acknowledge that darkness that's present within the human heart, the potential for violence that we all carry, and the really complex interplay of factors that can lead someone down such a destructive path.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this darkness, what do you think are the main takeaways from a case like this? What can we learn from, exploring this kind of abyss of human behavior?
Well, I think for one thing, it really highlights the importance of addressing trauma and mental illness.
Mm.
Hoffman's life was full of abuse and neglect, and those experiences, without a doubt, shaped his worldview and his actions. And I think if we as a society can do a better job of providing support and resources to people who are struggling, maybe we can prevent tragedies like this from happening.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that early intervention, providing a safety net for people who are falling through the cracks, can make a world of difference. We can't just, ignore the signs of trouble and hope that they'll go away on their own.
Exactly. We need to create a culture where asking for help is seen as a strength, not a weakness, where mental health issues are treated with the same urgency and compassion as physical health issues.
I couldn't agree more. It's about creating a society that values empathy and understanding and support for people who are struggling, no matter what their circumstances are.
And I think it's also important to remember that evil doesn't always present itself in some obvious way.
Yeah.
It can often be hidden behind a mask of normalcy or even harmlessness.
So you're saying that we need to be more aware to pay attention to those subtle cues, the red flags that might suggest that someone is struggling or maybe harboring some dangerous thoughts.
Exactly. We can't just assume that everyone is okay or that evil only exists in, faraway places or in stories. It can be much closer than we think, lurking in the shadows of our own communities, sometimes even disguised as the seemingly ordinary person who lives next door.
That's a scary thought, but it's an important one. We can't afford to be naive or turn a blind eye to the potential for darkness that I think exists within us all. We have a responsibility to be vigilant, to look out for each other, and to create communities that prioritize safety and compassion and understanding.
And lastly, I think this case just reminds us that there are no easy answers when it comes to the complexities of human behavior.
Yeah.
We may never fully understand what drove Kuno Hoffman to do the things that he did, and that uncertainty can be really unsettling.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we as humans, we crave those clear explanations, those simple solutions, but sometimes the truth is much more messy and complicated and ultimately, beyond our grasp.
And that's okay. Sometimes the best we can do is just keep asking those tough questions and confront the darkness head on and try to create a world where tragedies like this are less likely to happen.
Well said. I think this deep dive into the case of the Vampire of Nuremberg has been a chilling reminder of, just how cruel humans can be. But it's also a call to action. It's a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent when it comes to evil.
And even though we may never have all the answers, I think this exploration has given us a lot to think about and a lot to discuss and hopefully, a lot to learn from as well.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the most important takeaway, that even in the darkest of stories, there's always something to be learned, something to be gained.
So as you go about your day, just remember the story of Kuno Hoffman. Remember it not just as a tale of horror, but as a reminder to be vigilant and to be compassionate and to never underestimate the complexity of the human heart.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Vampire of Nuremberg. And remember, there's always more to explore, more to discover. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.